One thing I wanted to say is it was hilarious on one of your pictures or some stuff you posted on Instagram, and someone asked you, "How old are you?" and you said 33. And so the comments, I mean, I seriously pissed myself laughing. It's like, man, you look amazing for a 33-year-old. And I'm like, how the hell do you think a 33-year-old is supposed to look? It's like,
Fucking
but
yeah, it's decrepit, like with a cane and
but yeah,
over.
but the thing is that I know, like I've been 20 years old at one point as well, and I know how it was that, yeah, 33-year-old at the time, it seemed old. Like it's not old, so it's like, okay, they're not about to die, but if they can stand up straight from a
Yeah,
couch, like I will be impressed. It's like that kind of stuff.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's wild because people start considering TRT at like
oh yeah.
29 years old now. They're like, I'm almost in my 30s. Things are gonna start shutting down. Like
Oh
it's just, and I get advertisements for it. Um, it's just it's wild to me. Like people expect to feel like shit by their late 20s. It's
yeah.
really real.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know. I think with the whole that's one thing, but the other thing is that they they have been led to believe, probably part of it is just finding an excuse to basically hop on the juice in a way, because like once you're on to some capacity, from then on basically you're playing a different game. So from then on, adding a little bit more, adding in another compound or whatever is not that big of a deal. Not nearly as much as just taking that first plunge. But like I'm getting questions that are like, man, so I have this and this issue. Like sometimes my libido is not that high, or sometimes I sleep badly or something. Um, do you think this is because of low testosterone? Like, do you think I should consider TRT? And it's like, man, like, do you think that other people are like walking around with like a raging libido 24/7, or like,
Yeah, it's one of those things where if someone is selling TRT, everything starts to become solvable by TRT. Like, oh, do you have brain fog?
brain
Like,
fog?
I have brain fog I like half my fucking day is brain fog, basically. Like I still get shit done, you
Yeah,
know?
like
And
low confidence. It's like, what? Like, what do you
do
think
you have
TRT is gonna
trouble?
do? Like,
Yeah, do you have trouble putting on muscle mass? Everyone has trouble putting on muscle mass. It's not fucking easy. Like even for me,
yeah,
like it's just, do you have trouble with fat gain? Like, yeah, if you don't
yeah,
exercise and do whatever you want in the modern world, you're gonna have trouble with fat gain.
yeah. No, it's madness.
I think Liver King, I think all of his stuff was prescribed. All of his stuff.
Well, yeah, I mean, like the types of
Doctor.
clinics that they have in Canada and America and a lot of these places. So we are going to be talking about bulking today, and yeah, actually, this taught me that it's a good idea to comment on other people's Instagram posts, because NH posted a picture of one of his recent bulks where he was up at like 230, so like 105 kilos or so, if my math is correct. And he made a point of how maybe that was not the best idea to bulk up there at the time. And I think I asked him that, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't you also make your best gains then? And that inspired like a very short back and forth on Instagram, and that also inspired this roundtable. So yeah, I'm very excited for this, and curious where we'll end up. So maybe let's open up the topic by asking, maybe just in general, maybe Geoff, you can go first here to let NH still wake himself up a bit. So in your mind, what would constitute a good, like a decently well set up bulk? Yeah, like doesn't have to be like an exhaustive list because we will talk about it more, but in a general sense.
To me, the training always comes first. So when talking about bulking, the bulk or lack of a bulk or main gaining or anything you're doing, it has to be done as a means to support your training. So I often see people talk about, dirty bulk or clean bulk or lean bulk or, the rate of weight gain or anything like that. But then, when you ask them about their training, they're just like, oh yeah, I do like push-pull legs or something, or like, how's your progression? And they have no idea. And so to me, a bulk or a lack of a bulk or anything else is always going to be to support the training. I often also look at it in terms of training age, as well as how advanced someone is, as well as how lean they are. So if someone is very lean and they're a beginner, they can get in a pretty aggressive surplus, especially if they've never been fat or obese, they've never struggled with their weight or any kind of disorders or anything like that. They can be pretty aggressive with that surplus. I've had people message me and they're like 8% body fat, legitimately 8% body fat, and like rail thin, absolutely rail thin, to the point where I'm sure a lot of people would think that, they're starving or something. And so in that case, you can get some pretty marvelous things happen when you get them in a pretty aggressive surplus. You just have them eat and train their face off, and they can put on, impressive amounts of muscle without that much fat gain in a lot of cases, naturally in a pretty short amount of time. I mean, I've seen some people put on, 30, 40 pounds of muscle, not a muscle, but 30 or 40 pounds their first year, and not much visible fat gain. Maybe there was, and it just sort of spread out across their body a little bit. But yeah, I think you can be fairly aggressive if you're in that situation. On the other hand, if you're more advanced and you're a slightly higher body fat percentage, so if someone is like 20, 22% body fat and they're more advanced, well, that same rate of weight gain is going to be almost exclusively fat, which is what we kind of want to avoid. So it kind of depends on where you are and how far away you are from your potential.
Just let me ask back on one thing. So you mentioned that if they are, let's say 20, 22% body fat, then most of the, and if they gain at the same rate, a lot of that is going to be fat. Is that because of the P ratio stuff, or what did you mean by that?
I think it's mostly because if they're advanced, I mean, so if you're advanced, like you're probably not going to be gaining more than like maybe 5 pounds of muscle a year, most likely.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, it'd be great. Like I think I've probably done about that this past year, maybe a little bit more. But then again, I don't even think I was as advanced as I thought I was. I was probably more like late intermediate, maybe early advanced, when I thought I was like solidly advanced. But even then, like if I try to put on 40 pounds, it's not going to be a good ratio. So it's not because of the P ratio. It's just that the P ratio will be bad just because you're not going to get that much muscle. But a beginner, like you might put on 20 pounds of muscle your first year, which is actually a pretty decent P ratio. So it's not because of like the P ratio. That's just sort of a byproduct of the situation.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I was just focused on the body fat percentages that you mentioned. Okay, so we will dissect this a bit more. But NH, your big picture approach to a successful bulk, like what would be some of your bullet points?
Well, first off, to rebound on what Geoff just said, he opened with the most important portion of the bulk, and that is the training. This is the key, and this is what most people forget. Most people start bulking and they gain a lot of weight, especially a lot of strength. And in their head, this means I'm getting muscle. This is not necessarily untrue, but if you lose sight of the training, which so many people do, and you think, okay, the bulk and the food I ingest is the most important, now you start to run into what I call the bulking meme, where you have lost sight of the reason why you eat in the first place. You eat to fuel the training. And this training variable is what is going to make or break your bulk. So, for example, to use the examples that Geoff just produced, someone who just got started, who has never bulked before and who's very underweight, that person will see results, visible aesthetic results, just from the bulk. just because they're going to finally look more than just like a rail. But the more you gain weight, the more you come to realize that you now want the mass that you gain to be more shift towards muscles. If me or Geoff or you attempted that type of bulk, of just pure clean diet bulk where the training is not valuable, we would just all look worse. There's no way around that. So to me, it gets to a point where you have to earn your bulk. And this was the point of my post that you reacted to. I hadn't earned my bulk at that time. I went way too high in weight, and maybe I could get that high in weight with an actual productive bulk. But at the time, it wasn't the case. I bulked from 180 to 240. This is the type of weight gain that should take years, right? If you want to be a perma bulker, which is perfectly possible, it should have been maybe 10 pounds a year, maybe 15. But I did that in 2 years, 3 years. So of course I was going to get fat. There was no way around that. But at the time, I was making the mistake that I tell my subscribers to not make. And it was that I focused on the scale. I thought that a bulk was just get heavier. So I ate and ate and ate, and I got stronger in the gym. So I thought I was doing good things. Then I cut down and I realized, oh, the only thing I was doing was I was putting on fat. Why? Because I lost sight of the training. I was 100% focusing on diet. And I know it's counterintuitive for the people listening to us because they think, well, bulking is diet, yeah, but to fuel the training always. If it doesn't, you're doing something wrong.
Yeah, okay. So okay, 240. That's a big boy for sure. And so when you say that you lost sight of the training, like what do you mean? So you did train, so you did get stronger. What would have been a way to not lose sight of the training and do it accordingly?
Well, I think that the best way is to always make sure that any weight that you gain is correlated with progression, tangible progression, and not just strength gains. I say that because some people would tell me, okay, well, I did my bulk, I gained 20 pounds, and my bench increased 60 pounds. That technically is progression, it's strength progression. But the issue is that it's not taking into account the fact that presses go up when you gain weight automatically, even if you gain no muscle. So that's not a good variable. Every single lift should have progressed, and your volume should have progressed. This is what a bulk is for. A bulk puts you in an anabolic state all the time. So you recover much faster. You can handle more volume. You can do more frequency. If you start, like Geoff said, with a push-pull leg 3 times a week, right? And let's say you did a total of 10 sets for each muscle group. And at the end of your bulk, you gain 20 pounds and you're still doing the same push-pull leg with the same amount of volume. I don't care if your lifts went up. The amount of tonnage that you are gaining is not enough to justify that weight gain. You should have done more sets, more volume, and maybe move to a 4 times a week, 5 times a week. Then when you cut back down, you could have moved back to the push-pull leg because you have less fuel to recover. That's what I mean by looking at the training when you bulk. Your body gets bigger and your workload also should get bigger.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, so basically your training should not only improve in terms of absolute numbers, but you should make a purposeful effort to make your training more effortful in a way, or at least more volume from what I'm understanding. But
yeah,
go on.
Yeah, absolutely. You should use what the bulk gives you. The bulk gives you hyphen recovery, so make use of that hyphen recovery. It's what I mean also by don't get consumed by the bulk, because it can be very easy to just be content with the fact that you're seeing the scale go up. But understand that if you do more volume and frequency, more of that weight that you gain is going to be skewed towards muscle mass and not fat. So that's in truth the success to a successful bulk. It's what I did wrong back then. And if I had tried to do what I'm preaching right now back then, I would have realized that it's not possible. Because for me to scale up the amount of volume and frequency I do to match a 240-pound body, how do you do that? Do you train 8 times a week? Do you train 5 hours a day? I couldn't justify that weight gain. So realistically, maybe back then I could have booked up to 200 pounds with the workload I was doing and my ability to handle the workload. And by looking at the training and what I can do in the gym, it would have stopped my bulk short and I would have been able to not gain so much fat.
So, sorry, Geoff, I'm going to come back to you. I just want to be sure that we understand each other. So let's take an example, like you're 180, you're bulking up to 190. if you, like, let's say you add a couple of pounds on your lifts, then okay, that's something, but you went up by 10 pounds, so we want to see a bit more. So like in that case, let's say from 180 to 190, like what would be like a rough example of a training change or a change in your training setup, as well as your lifts and strength levels that you would say like, okay, that's good for those 10 pounds of body weight gain?
Okay, so let's say that the 10 pounds you gain in a year, which is very conservative and realistic for anyone. Anyone can do that.
Okay.
It's only 10 pounds, right? For me, it was 180 to 240, was 60 pounds. So for 10 pounds, I would prescribe something like add 3 sets. Let's say you used to do 9 sets of biceps. I think you can move up to 12 sets with that extra 10 pounds. It's realistic. And it's going to conduce to more muscle growth at the end of your bulk. Try to do that for every muscle group. So you're going to add something like 15 to 18 additional sets to your training. You might not even have to add an extra day. It might be just an extra 1 hour, 1 hour and a half, or 2 hours on your total training schedule. That's not that much, but it does mean a lot when you end your bulk, because all of these sets add up at the end of the year because you gain these 10 pounds in a year. And then when it comes to strength, I'm not a fan of strength standards, but I am a fan of strength progression when it comes to building muscle. So for me, it's going to depend on the individual. But if you gain 10 pounds, you should be able to put 20, 25 pounds on your bench, 30 pounds maybe, squat maybe 20 pounds, deadlift maybe 40 pounds. It goes a long way. That's also the thing with bulk that I've realized with time, is that when you allow your body to grow bigger, quite literally in terms of volume and mass, it is automatically going to make you stronger. And if it doesn't, then you really know that you messed up your bulk.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. So, okay, so this sounds a little bit along the lines of, I think I said it in a video, which I would kind of moderate that statement, but I said it in a video a while ago that if you're thinking about how much volume to do, like try to do the most amount of volume you can while still meeting those strength gain or strength progression rates that are reasonable given your training gauge. So like if you can add, let's say 2 pounds on the bar every week, that's good. But if you can still do that while doing, let's say 5 sets more, that's probably better. So is it something like that what you're saying?
I think that, yes, you've touched something that is very important as well with the bulk, is to not get hypnotized by weight on the bar. Weight on the bar is one variable for progressive overload, and it might not be the best one when you bulk. Because even though, yes, your strength grows up naturally when you are getting bigger, what grows even faster is your recovery rate. So I would always encourage people, let's say you bench 200 pounds for 3 sets, before moving to 205 pounds for your set, try to do 4 sets with 200 pounds. Get your additional reps on your 4th set, then move up in weight. That is going to give you more volume at the end of the day. And it's also going to help with strength progression.
All right. So Geoff, I think now, so we were going to talk about bulking, but we need to make a little bit of a training side tangent, although it is related to bulking. So first of all, like, how do you go about this? Do you also try to push up your like total training output and not just progressing weight? I mean, you're doing fairly high volume to begin with, but do you make a strong point at this during a bulk?
I make a moderate point of it. I actually heard this when I first started training. I heard, it might have been Arnold, where they said something like, in the pre-contest phase, volume goes way up. And even back then in my first year of training, I remember thinking, that sounds like bullshit, because right at the moment when you have less energy going into the system, now you want to increase the demands on the body. You want to do more. And to me, that seemed kind of backwards. And I know there's been research coming out saying like, oh, what should you do with your volume when you're cutting? Should you keep it? Should you lower it or something? I always had the opinion of, if you use the same volume when you're cutting, well, it probably means you were sandbagging on your bulk, right? And so definitely don't waste your bulk. I know Alpha Destiny had a video titled, Don't Waste Your Bulk. And I do think you want to use that opportunity to do more, not necessarily like double your volume or something. But if you're not doing more, I do think you're giving something up. And so I tend to bulk pretty hard, but then I also do pretty high volume, and I'm pushing my recovery capabilities and capacities. And then you also do want to be getting stronger as well. Because if you just chuck in a bunch of volume, but you're not getting stronger as you're gaining weight, I think something is a little bit off there as well. Now, then there's always going to be someone who asks me, oh, should you prioritize volume or should you prioritize the strength? I think you want to have that happy middle ground. Because if you do too much volume, then it's going to kill your progression. I think for most people, even if you're bulking, at a certain point, it's just too much, especially on some lifts. And you also don't want to have progression to the point where you're not doing any volume at all. Maybe some people can do well on that, like the high intensity training kind of thing. But I would say for most people, you're going to want to try to balance still progressing while also having enough volume. And it's probably going to be more volume than if you're at maintenance. And it's certainly going to be, at least in my opinion, more volume than if you were cutting, right? Like I tend to auto-regulate my training. And so it's not like, oh, I jump it by 20% when I'm in a 20% surplus or something. Like there's no ratio. I just auto-regulate. And so maybe I'll do 2 to 4 sets or 3 to 5 sets or maybe 4 to 5 sets or 2 to 4 sets or whatever, somewhere in that range. And I just find naturally that as I'm recovering better and as I have more energy and as I have just a greater desire to do more work, then I just do more work. And as I'm cutting, maybe I feel a little bit more beaten up or I'm just not recovering as well. And so the volume tends to just slightly go down, maybe 20, 30% less volume at the end of a cut. So it's not a drastic falling off, but there is a little bit just based on having less energy going into the system.
Right. So how do you guys think about strength gains? We talked about this before, I think with both of you, but like the original kind of model that was always that, okay, you need to lift heavier weights because like you need to challenge the system. So like the more you challenge the system with bigger weights, the more you're going to grow. And then it basically now flipped to the polar opposite where it was like, okay, basically like you're getting bigger, therefore you're getting stronger. So were you like trying to make a point, or I was just making overly funny hand gestures? what was that? Oh, anyway,
I was saying like I was saying like you want to let the weights come to you gradually. Like you don't want to push things. Like the weight on the bar will just show up if you wait hard or something like that.
Yeah, and so that's exactly where I'm always like in a little bit of a limbo about, because so I think up to a certain point this works. But I also think that at a certain point, at least from what I tend to see, it's more of something that sounds great in theory, but in practice is just very tough. Especially, I think you guys, actually, I'm curious how it is for you because both of you are pretty strong. Like for me, if I do a Romanian deadlift and now I'm at fairly heavy weights again, there comes a point where no matter whether I lift like 20 kilos heavier or lighter, it always feels super difficult. So if I was to just wait for the point where, okay, now it feels easy, so clearly it's time to increase the weight, then it would just never happen. So I need to chase those weights a little bit. Like now I'm again doing 175 kilos. I did it for 6 the other day. And as I was warming up, like I went up to 160. And probably if I did 6 reps with that, like I would still feel like I'm going to break in half. But so I have to be proactive by going heavier. So I know it's not really tied to bulking, but it is kind of important because, as NH pointed out, that's one of the things that people always look at as they bulk, the strength gains. But do you guys think that there is something about chasing those heavier weights by itself that is important for the whole growth process? Maybe NH, you can chime in first, because.
So once again, great questions. Before we focus on this, I would just want to rebound on 3 things that Geoff said because they're very important for the listeners. So first off, Arnold, we all heard that as well. Yes, he used to claim that he did more volume before. So when he was cutting before a prep, his argument was that it allowed him to look more shredded, get more lines. That's PD user talk. We don't know if it's true or not. He used to claim to train like 2 times a day, 3 hours. That could be an exaggeration. But for naturals, this makes absolutely no sense. You will never do more volume before you step on stage or during a cut, you don't have the energy for that. So if he did tell the truth, either he was on a ton of methamphetamine to have the energy, or like caffeine or something, or he was doing junk volume, which there's no point. Second point, the balance between volume and intensity. Which one should you prioritize during the bulk? The answer is yes. It's both. Like Geoff said, because if you only do volume, as Geoff said, you won't progress in terms of strength. And if you only do intensity, you won't get enough volume to justify growth. So you have to have a good balance of both. Some individuals are going to favor volume like I or Geoff. Some people are going to want more intensity. That's perfectly fine, but you need both. You cannot do one set. Right? If you bulk and you do one set, that's just, why are you even bulking? That is idiotic. You have to multiply the set. It's absolutely necessary, but you also don't want to be the guy that does 10 sets of 225 on the bench and you get 10 reps each time. Well, what are you doing? You're sandbagging. You could do 3 sets of 245 and get more progression from that, get less overall fatigue, and you would be better off. So that's important. But I think that most people, when they bulk, they tend to focus on intensity because they see the strength going up. So they reduce the sets. On top of that, if you bulk too fast, you're going to get out of breath. You're going to have less energy. You're going to be a little bit lethargic in the gym. So more volume, maybe 10 or 12 reps is going to leave you out of breath, especially on squats or pulls, which is going to naturally skew you towards lower reps. You're going to get another of volume, and at the end of your bulk, you're going to be disappointed with the mass you gained. So this is a warning for everyone watching. Yes, you get stronger, but don't hyper-focus on these 1 or 2 sets of low reps. You have to do high reps as well. And then the third point, tangent, when you cut or when you bulk, training is always the key. So if someone cuts, for example, and they realize that they are losing a ton of muscle, it's not because they're losing weight, it's not because their calories are low, it's because their volume in training has went down too fast. 20% loss is perfectly doable, but if it happens in 2 weeks, you did something wrong. You lost too much weight too fast. So that was for that. And then we can move on to the second great point that you made, the strength. So should you chase numbers? Should you push these heavy weights? I think the answer is yes. Because as you've noticed, you get to a point, especially when you are quote unquote strong, where your warm-ups feel just as hard as your top sets. And this is due to the body warming up. It's also neurological, right? Let's say your top set of Romanian deadlifts is 160 kilos, 365 pounds, and you get 6 reps and you think, wow, I'm dying. After that, try to put 130 kilos on the bar, the warm-up beforehand that felt like hell, and you're going to move it like it's a feather. It's going to feel like nothing because now your body is adapted to the higher weight. But it's a warning sign for people, because if you stop at the 130 kilo bar thinking, well, clearly this is hard enough, so it's a top set, wrong, keep pushing. You are never as strong as you think you are on your warm-ups. Never trust a warm-up. It's not, in my opinion, a good representation of what you can actually lift. Put the weight on the bar that you know you should be able to handle and just move it, especially on the bulk. And that should give you a clear assessment of what your top set is and what the way that puts you to actual failure is.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. That's I'm really glad that we agree on that, because and this is why these podcasts can be useful, because I'm pretty sure that if I asked like a lot of your loyal followers, like, what do you think NH thinks of strength gains? They wouldn't say what you just said. So I'm glad that we clarified that. And thank you. So what was I going to say? Yeah. So on the whole strength gain topic, maybe that's kind of then a good segue to talk about the weight gain itself, because obviously one big argument against gaining a lot of weight on a bulk or too much is that, well, what's the point? Because then you will just have to cut it all off. But obviously we try to bulk and accept some fat gain because we are hoping that as we are cutting that off, we are going to keep some of what we actually gained. So yeah, how much weight gain is too much? Let's start there. Geoff, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, just one thing quick on the previous topic.
Oh yeah. Feel free to add anything.
I actually have an analogy. I actually have an analogy for this. There was this flash game like 10 or 15 years ago where you could hit your mouse on the button and you were flying this helicopter in this tunnel. And if you hit the mouse button, the helicopter would move up. And if you didn't hit the mouse button, the helicopter would fall down. So you had to keep hitting your mouse button, but not always, because if you always hit the button, it would crash into the ceiling of this tunnel.
Isn't
He
that the
did
one
hit the
that
mouse button.
generated a lot of raging players that like, because it was so
Yeah,
frustrating to play with?
yeah,
Flappy
because
Bird.
you would,
Yeah.
if it glitched or something, if you missed even like 1 second, you would run into a wall. So it was really frustrating because you'd get a long way and then just you would blink and then you would fail.
Yeah.
And training is kind of like this, because if you try to push strength progression too much, well, now you're trying to optimize for strength. Now you're trying to use this big arch in the bench press. You're using leg drive. Your hips are coming off the bench, etc. So if you really try to push to optimize for strength, maybe your volume is going down. You're trying to peak your strength, even though your goal is hypertrophy. So you're pushing that strength button too much, and you're going to run into the ceiling. But if you don't push progression at all, you're just like, yeah, when this weight gets easy, I guess I'll go up when I'm hitting sets of 20 with 10 reps in reserve, right? Like if you're not hitting the strength button at all, you're not progressing and really trying to actively add weight. And I see this, and I see both mistakes in a lot of different people. Then you run into the floor. So you really do want to be in that middle where you're trying to progress, but you're not trying to progress to the point where you're actually effectively ruining your actual progression. So it is a little bit of a balancing act.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Now, as for the rate of weight gain, I personally have always been very aggressive with both my bulks and my cuts. And I think this is an area that natural hypertrophy and I will disagree on. So when I bulk, I'm fairly aggressive, especially coming out of the bottom of a cut. When I cut, especially at the end of a bulk, I'm pretty aggressive. So, I've lost 3 kilos in the past 2 weeks, and that's average moving weight. That's not just like a low day and a high day or something. So when I'm cutting, I'll aim for at least 1 kilo per week in the very beginning of a cut. And in the beginning of a bulk, at the end of a cut, it'll be probably like 3 kilos per month. So like 6 or 7 pounds per month, which is faster than most people advocate. And I guess the counter argument is, why not just stay roughly the same weight? Like, why bulk, why cut? Just main gain at somewhere in the middle. I haven't had any success with that. I've tried it, and it just seemed like I felt okay, but wasn't really making the progression that I wanted to make. That being said, with clients, I tend to be a little bit more conservative, just because no one wants to be the coach that just got someone fat or something, right? So I'm often a little bit more conservative, maybe more like 1 to maybe 2 kilos per month. So like 2 to 3 to maybe 4 pounds per month of weight gain. But then again, it is all situational based on the training age, and then based on how lean they are as well.
Okay. Yeah. NH, what do you think of that?
So first off, with the strength thing, you're correct. That
yeah, feel free to add always things to the previous one. I tend to make these very awkward transitions, so I apologize.
It's fine. You're a Gatling gun of good ideas. That's your issue. But then we always go back because we still have more to say. So the thing with the strength is that, of course, I'm natural hypertrophy. And the natural bias, and I would even say prejudice of people, is to think that hypertrophy has nothing to do with strength. And maybe people are going to listen to this and say, well, that's exactly what you say. Wrong. Well, if you listen to me, it's not what I say. To me, strength is a metric of progression. It's just not what I care about. I will never train to get stronger, but I will get stronger to train. That's the thing that defines a bodybuilder. I don't care about the weight on the bar. The weight on the bar has to challenge me, which means that at some point I'm going to have to put more weight on the bar. That's called strength. You could call that strength training. It's not wrong. The difference is in the focus. I don't want that. This is not my goal. This is a byproduct of my goal. This is what is going to lead you towards my goal. And so as a bodybuilder, you should approach weight on the bar as just another variable of progressive overload with no emotional attachment and without hyper-focusing on it. Because if you do, very quickly you're going to realize that weight on the bar is the most satisfying way to actually progressively overload. It's the one that psychologically feels the best because you feel cool. Hey, I put plates on the bar. Like if you ask a lifter, hey, which one do you prefer? Do an extra rep or put an extra plate? They're always going to answer the extra plate, always. Same for additional sets, same for additional days. Frequency is never mentioned for progressively overloading a lift, but adding 3 sets on a completely different day is much more potent for hypertrophy than putting a small plate on the bar, always. So this is sort of the issue and this discrepancy I'm trying to correct, because I know exactly what happens to bodybuilders when they obsess over weight on the bar. They turn into what I call strength copers. They lose sight of hypertrophy and aesthetics. Now they sort of train for strength, but they don't do it properly because no powerlifter would co-sign the way they train. And then they're in this weird limbo where they get nothing done. So it's what I would try to avoid. And I see bulks as almost a pathological agent that contaminates people with that disease, because the more you bulk, the stronger you get, the more you have a tendency to focus on weight on the bar. And this is when all of the issue starts, because now you get fat just to justify getting strong, but you started the bulk to gain muscle, so it's a whole mess. Someone who I think does bulks properly in terms of training valuables is Geoff. Because yes, he gets stronger, but as he says, he gets stronger because it's a means for him to push muscle gain. So that is the way to do. That's the approach to actually espouse when you're doing a bulk. After that, the amount of weight you're going to gain to access the strength progression is the discussion. Right? Let's say we have this middle ground here, and this middle ground is main gaining. Then we have conservative bulks and conservative cuts, then aggressive bulks and aggressive cuts. First off, this is a spectrum, right? There's not just one, oh, this is an aggressive bulk. No, there's a range of that. And then I would even argue that past the aggressive bulk phase, there is the giga bulking phase where you just get obese for the sake of getting obese. And there's also the giga cut phase where you have a potential eating disorder. And many young men are stuck in that, or they're way too skinny, and you see them way too skinny for years at a time. And you ask yourself, okay, how is it possible? You are clearly not progressing in the gym and you're not making any progress in terms of aesthetics. So why are you still there? Well, they're still there because they might have very advanced body dysmorphia. They might follow certain influencers that tell them to stay shredded bra, which destroys their gains, because when you're a skinny young man, you have to gain weight. There's no way around it. So this is our spectrum, and this is what we deal with. I am more conservative. I always tell people to be conservative. But then you deal with one of these guys and you ask yourself, okay, well, should that guy be conservative? He can gain so much weight. He's 80% body fat. He can gain much more weight. And this is when an aggressive bulk to me is almost always justified. Skinny young man. Because even if you don't gain as much muscle as you think, and the fat to muscle ratio is distorted towards fat, you're still going to look so much better because your frame needs that fat. Then you have the slight correction I would make. It's just a psychological bias of mine to always look out for people who might have the tendency to develop disorders. It is possible that someone who was very skinny and gains weight too fast is going to develop a form of bulimia. And this is something that needs to be watched out for. So this is more of a case-by-case individual basis. But when we deal with teenagers, we have to be very aware of that, because the extreme of what can be called psychological disorders tend to resonate with one another. So it's possible for someone who was anorexic to develop bulimia if you put them on too high of a caloric increase, but that should not be an excuse to not gain weight as a young man.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so let's just take the person who is relatively what we can assume to be our prototypical listener now, so probably in the intermediate stage-ish now. Like what would be, like, is there a weight gain range that you would recommend to them?
So this one is tricky, right? Because I would always tell people to aim for 2 pounds a month. So 0.5 pounds a week. That is extremely conservative. Most people would tell you that that's not enough, and you might even be technically main gaining. The issue why I always promote this approach is that at least you know you're getting quality mass. Right? It would be really hard to gain only fat if you gain that little. The issue is that it also requires a more minute attention to details, because it's absolutely possible to spin your wheels if you only gain that much. But if we look at it on a broader scale, you gain 1 to 2 pounds a month. At the end of 10 months, you still gain 10 to 20 pounds. That's a sizable amount. And some people who are 140 could tell me, well, that only makes me 160. Yes, but you're going to train again next year. So next year you might go to 170, then next year 180, then next year 190. That's a lot of weight gain. And most of that should be muscle if you're conservative. And I don't just say that as an hypothetical of the perfect bulk. I did that. I've experienced doing that. when I grew up training from 15 to 19, 20, this is what I did. 10 pounds a year without going to 20 pounds the next year. It was 10 pounds, 10 pounds, 10 pounds. And I did it with absolutely no knowledge of nutrition or training. I did it because my parents would just feed me slightly more. So I never had the opportunity to gain more weight. And again, in hindsight, this was a blessing because this is when I made my best gains. After that, when I had access to unlimited food and I started being able to gain a lot more weight faster, I overbooked and I lost sight of why my previous bulk was so successful. It was because it was quality mass and it was slow and conservative.
Okay, well, okay. On the actual weight gain amount, we will be like on complete agreement, as in you and I. So that will be a boring part. But just on, okay, I'll get back on your bulk in a second that you did. Geoff, what would be your range recommendation?
Pretty similar. I think maybe my bias is I was like a skinny distance runner. And so I was basically just done with that. And so my initial, I think the first 2 months that I started lifting, I gained like, what did I go? I went from like 68 to 77 kilos or something. So I gained 9 kilos or 20 pounds in the first 2 months or something like that. So it's just sort of how I've always done it and how I've always had success, just being more aggressive with the bulks and then cutting the fat off later, just because fat loss is, I'm not going to say easier, but it's certainly faster compared to muscle growth. And so that's just sort of how I've always done it. And then I've also, perhaps due to my various interactions with some content creators, I've gotten quite a few clients who have fallen into that mold of like skinny and not eating enough. And they've been doing that for a very long time. And they've gotten in this way of thinking like, you know, oh, I have to have abs. Oh, I need to have the shredded muscles, bra, etc. And they're influenced by these guys who are not natural. And so they think, oh, these guys are staying lean year round. And so I need to go do that as well. And so in order to break that cycle, sometimes you just have to say, hey, okay, we're going to gain, you know, at a pretty aggressive rate. And you can monitor it as well. I think that's key as well. You can say, hey, let's aim for this, see how it goes, and we can always cut back as needed. And I think as you get closer to that, say 20%, maybe 22% body fat range, you can make the surplus a little bit smaller. You can make the rate of weight gain a little bit lower. And this is maybe just personal preference as well, just because most people don't like going a whole bunch beyond 20% body fat. I don't think it's as much a P ratio thing as a preference ratio thing. Like not many men.
Different P ratio.
Different P ratio. So, you know, most people prefer being a little bit leaner, but they'll accept some fat gain, but they won't accept fat gain past a certain point. Plus, I do think physiologically, you can main gain at 20% body fat. That's not the issue, I think. It's when you try to main gain at 8 or 10 or even 12. And sometimes you can't even main gain at 14 or 15%. Some can, but definitely I've seen people who, I think Dave McCoy, he said he tried to main gain at like 15% body fat, and it just wasn't working very well. He would go back and forth between 14 and 16, just between that range, and it just, you know, nothing was really happening until he went higher. And I've seen that many times. So I do think that you might want to push things up a little bit further, but the higher you go, the less quickly you have to go, if that makes sense.
Yeah, on the okay, so first of all, NH, anything to add to that?
Well, the main gaining thing is always a recurrent topic on this platform because there are still people who try to push it as a legitimate mean for young men to gain muscles. And they always try to weasel their way out by saying, oh, it's not what I actually meant. Again, it's the semantic excuse at this point. The subject has been tied and done with, but it's very important that people keep in mind that men gaining in its proper form, what it's supposed to mean is that you are staying at the same weight, so you're not at a caloric surplus, and you're gaining muscle. And then you have two schools, right? You have people who say, oh, that's absolutely impossible. And you have people who say, oh, it's possible and it's the best way. They're both wrong. It's possible, but it's reserved to a very small percent of people. Someone like me was able to main gain because I was 210. That's a lot of weight, and I was 18% body fat. So I had plenty of things to work with. I transformed my fat into muscle, and it took me 3 years. I recomped for 3 years, and I think I might have lost 2 to 3% body fat. And some people tell me, well, what exactly is the point? You could have lost that cutting in 6 months. Yeah, but look at my weight. 3% of 210 is what? It's a lot more than what people are going to think, right? 1% would be 10 to 2 pounds, so it's 6 to 8 pounds. I lost 6 to 8 pounds of fat that turned into what? Muscle. It didn't just transform into water in my body, right? I was the same weight. So what I did is in 3 years, I gained 8 pounds of muscle. And if you look at my transformation video, I look completely different because 8 pounds of muscle on someone who's advanced minus 3% body fat makes a big difference. But I reached a point, even at 210 still, where my body fat was now too low for me to justify staying on the recomp. I was seeing the progress slow way down, and I realized, okay, now I have to bulk. Now it's time to start eating again very slowly. I'm getting pound weight very slowly, but if I decided to just main gain for the rest of my life, in 3 years would have come back and would have seen the same NH. I would have not made a single gain. So it would be a bad idea. And we see that with the Dave anecdote. I'm not surprised that Dave would have struggled main gaining at 15% body fat because he has a stringier body type. He has longer limbs. He's taller than all of us. I think he's the taller of all of us. And so it was not possible for him with his frame, with his body predispositions to gain sizable amounts of muscles at that weight. Now, let's say he gained 40 pounds. Now he could main gain. He could main gain at this 40 pounds. The question is, would it be a good idea to gain that much weight in that fashion than main gain? Isn't it faster and even better psychologically to gain that same weight on a bulk? It's why I always advocate a slow conservative approach. What I did is this personally. My bulk skyrocketed. I got way too fat. And then I lost a tiny bit of that weight and I main gained from here. This was because for me, the gain and the loss was not doable. It just didn't work for someone like me. But now I've gotten to a point where I've stabilized and I can start doing these bulking and cutting cycles again. I'm going to be honest with you, I'm most likely just going to keep bulking very slowly upon my bulk. And I might cut if I want to maybe do a show one day, which is very unlikely. But it's that question of bias that also comes into play. This is why I advocate like this. It's because of my past experiences. Same for Geoff. So someone like, if I were to pair us, I think that you and I, Abel, would have the same approach because we have had similar experiences, and Geoff and Dave would have similar approaches because they've also had similar experiences.
Yeah, it's by the way, I just had a meltdown. I saw myself in the camera here, and the first time ever, I look a lot like my father, so it creeped me out for a second. Slight side tangent. NH, I actually want to ask you about that recomp that you had for the past 3 years, because obviously 3 years is a long time, and you know, if we just look at those raw numbers, then I mean, basically, we could math it out that you would be like in a, I don't know, like a 20 calorie deficit or a 50 calorie deficit for 3 years, which I'm assuming it's not the case. You're also not like counting calories very meticulously, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So like when I heard your story, like my first reaction was that like, well, most probably what actually happened is that, yeah, on the net balance, this was a recomp, but it doesn't mean that like it was like one recomp protocol for 3 years. It was like, you've had phases, like sometimes you maybe got even a little bit fatter, sometimes a bit leaner, and like you hovered around the same weight. Is that more or less how it was?
Yeah, yes, because it's absolutely impossible, even if you're very anal about it, to count calories to the point that you're always going to stay at the same body weight and you're always going to get the same calories in a day that maintains that body weight, simply because the body shifts. Your TDEE is not the same day to day. So tracking that is not possible. And I would argue that it's not realistic and not necessary. It's okay to fluctuate. The goal of the recomp and the main gaining phase is that the fluctuation is taken to a minimal. So it's as small as possible so as to not impact the training, which is completely different from cuts and bulks. You bulk up, the fluctuation is high, which would also correlate with a high fluctuation up in training. And it's the same for the cut. you go down, you know that your training is also going to go down. Now, what I would argue is that with the bulk, the fluctuation up of the volume and frequency going up and the weight on the bar should be a conscious choice, as we've discussed. But when you go down, you should not consciously reduce your volume on cuts. I see people do that. It's a mistake. Let the cut dictate what you can and cannot do. Some people will find that they don't lose that much volume or workload ability or work capacity ability on the cut. But that's beyond the point. With the main gaining phase, what I've noticed is that my training was similar day to day, meaning that the progression was very, very slow. I think I added in 3 years, on the deadlift, I might have added 70 pounds, which is still pretty good in 3 years. Bench, something like 25, 30 pounds. The main lifts, the squat, maybe 50, 60 pounds. The main lifts didn't move that much. What did move, however, is what people call the accessory. So this is why I recommend to people who want to recomp, if they can recomp, focus on your weak points, because there you will see a lot of progress. I took my skull crushers from 50 pounds to 110 pounds for sets of 12. That's 60 pounds for the long out of the tricep. That's a lot, right? People also have to scale it back to what muscle is moving what. 70 pounds on a squat is not 70 pounds on a curl, right? The bicep is a much smaller muscle group. That amount of progression on the bar is going to result in massive gains for the bicep. So this is what I did. Calves, my calves were non-existent. I added an inch on my calves without gaining weight. So that's for all of the people who say that it's impossible to gain size on your calves. It absolutely is. You just have to progress. This was what I was doing. And now that I'm out of that phase, I'm seeing all of the lifts that used to stall because I didn't feed them properly go up again. So it's a choice to make. I'm certain that some people, they would try to recomp. They would see that it's not going fast at all. It's very slow. And they would say, okay, that's not for me. I prefer cutting and bulking, and that's fine. You have to pick the one method that is going to be conducive to you sticking to it.
Yeah, but you said 110 pounds for the skull crushers with...
Yeah, in total, it's what I lift. It's not the increase. It's what I use for my working sets.
So that is the 50 kilos?
Yeah.
Then, okay, then we're almost at the same place. I did 50 for 10 just recently. I was very happy with that. You also like let it behind your head, right?
Yeah, technically I do what people call lying tricep extension. So I don't lock above head. My shoulder is rotated maximally towards the bench. Yeah, and I do it in this range of motion here.
Oh, okay, awesome. Geoff, do you know what your numbers are on that one?
I don't do those all that much. I'll do overhead, just cable overhead extensions typically. Although I did start doing them with a football bar, but it wasn't like a long-term thing. It was like 3 sessions. And I'm pretty close to that. Yeah, I'm 47.5 kilos for 10.
Oh, okay. Very similar.
Although I'm not sure. The bar might be a little bit heavier. I think I counted.
No, it's not. Just kidding.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So it's pretty comparable, I think. And then for cables, yeah, for push downs, it's 50 kilos for 10. Overhead cable extensions, 50 kilos for 8. So
yeah, that's crazy what you're doing on those overhead extensions for weight. Yeah. So Geoff, so I think, just to kind of talk a bit more about the main gaining thing. Anything to add to what NH said? And if not, then like, what is if you have concerns about gaining too slow, then you could address those and just what you think of the whole main gaining concept in general.
So you can kind of look at it like Bitcoin or a stock. They might look at this trend line, like here are the fundamentals of the stock. And you can say, oh, it's overbought or it's oversold. So if it's above the trend line, that means it's overpriced and you should sell. And if it's below the trend line, it means, oh, wow, that's a good deal. It's below what it should be. And I kind of look at this same thing as trying to bulk or cut. So I have a lot of volatility when it comes to bulking and cutting. So I'll bulk hard and bulk pretty aggressively, but then I'll also cut fairly aggressively. And I think that can backfire as well. It's the idea like, oh, you lose the muscle that you gained during the bulk, during the cut. I don't think that's as common as a lot of people lead on, but it is certainly possible. Other people, they like a little bit more stability. So they don't want these big fluctuations. Maybe they want a very, very slow bulk and then maybe some recomp, maybe occasionally cut to clean things up, then a slower bulk. And I think that can work as well. A lot of it is probably based on your personality type. I like extremes, so when I have a goal, I like to really attack it, go after it. So when I'm bulking, I like to be aggressive with it. When I'm cutting, I also like to be, even more aggressive with it. But that's definitely not for everyone. And I think that the better your lifestyle situation as well as your training is, the further you can stray away from maintenance. So if you're sleeping really, really well, if your diet is really, really good, your stress is low, you're training like a professional athlete or something, and it's really a main focus, then you can accept a bigger surplus when you bulk, and you can actually benefit from that. You can also benefit from a bigger deficit when you cut and maintain all of your muscle. However, if you're in a situation where you're stressed out all the time, your job is really, really busy, your relationships are all going to hell, and at that point, you might want to just maintain. Because if you tried to bulk, it would probably not be a great situation. Or if you try to cut, it would also probably not be a great situation. So I look at it as the more ideal your situation, the further away from maintenance calories you can stray. And then, of course, the body fat percentage comes into it as well. So if someone is trying to maintain when they're super lean, they're a prime candidate for a bulk, and they'll benefit from that. If someone is trying to maintain at 22% body fat and it's not working, that's a training issue. Or maybe it's a lifestyle issue or a sleep issue or a stress issue. Right? It's not really a calorie issue in that case. And just throwing more calories into the equation, you're already, inching above 20% body fat, I think is just generally a really bad idea. It might get you stronger just because it's increasing your leverages, but I think that is maybe a little bit irresponsible.
And Geoff, do you think that when you say that, okay, like 22% body fat, that's like a good top end, is that like how much of that is a practical thing and how much of that is a physiological thing? So like, do you think that if someone had like zero vanity or whatever, like they were like in complete isolation, so doesn't even have a mirror or whatever, should that person like bulk up to like even like 40% body fat and that's when they would build the most muscle, or that would be problematic even physiologically?
So I do think that health becomes a concern. And I don't think 20% body fat is necessarily unhealthy, but I do think that especially if you're carrying a lot of muscle mass as well, and you're a bigger guy, 20% body fat will probably be less healthy than 15%. And so I think as a natural, you have a lot more wiggle room, obviously, compared to someone who's enhanced in terms of your health. But I also do think that if you're going up to 25%, 30% body fat, you're going up to 240, 250 pounds, at a certain point, blood pressure might be an issue. Pre-diabetes could be an issue for some people if they're predisposed to that. And so health, I think, is sometimes a concern. And I don't think naturals necessarily need regular blood work. But, if you are getting out of breath, going up the stairs and stuff like that, I think that it's probably not a good overall situation. Plus, if your eventual goal is like 12% body fat or something, like your final form, well, you're going to have like stretch marks, extra skin and stuff like that if you go to 30, 35. So I think a lot of it is the aesthetics, the personal preference. Then you throw in the health situation. And if you just want to be strong, yeah, like bloat max for sure. But most people have other considerations as well.
Awesome. NH, what do you think of all of that? I'm sure you have some thoughts.
A lot of thoughts. So this is why I wanted to have this talk with you guys. Is because I think that if there is one thing that needs to be killed in people's heads, it's the idea that to be able to gain muscle and get big, like us, quote unquote, you have to giga bulk. I see that people say that all the time, and you sort of had the same idea where you told me, well, yeah, sure, you got fat, but isn't that fatness the reason why after the cut you look so good? Isn't that the stage at which you gain all of the muscle? And technically you're correct, but the nuance I want to add is that I didn't have to go that high. to build that much muscle. Because when you look at the weight I lost from 240 to 210, 30 pounds. That's 30 pounds of additional muscle. I don't think that it's justifiable to say that I needed these 30 pounds of my frame to build muscle, because having fat on your frame doesn't build muscle. What builds muscle is being in a caloric surplus. So I could have gotten the same exact results without getting these 30 pounds, because these 30 pounds were additional calories that my body didn't know what to do with. So mathematically speaking, we can say for certain that if I had been more conservative, these 30 pounds were not needed. The only thing that was needed was the caloric surplus. And this is, by the way, why I never discourage people from doing bulks, because yes, I gain my muscle on bulks. There's no way to get bigger without bulking. You cannot create matter out of thin air, out of nothing. We're not God yet. So this is what's going to have to happen. And this is then the discussion of what is the range, right? Geoff bulks aggressively, but he never bulked as aggressively as I did. He's not giga bulking. He's not getting fat. He loses his abs. He's a little bit more fluffy, but he gets to a point where the average male would see his body and say, well, I want to look like this. That's a good looking body, right? This is, I think, is the threshold up. 20%. We could, if we want numbers, we could say 20%. But anything beyond that, why are you doing this? And I would even say I disagree with Geoff on one thing, is that even if you're training for strength, it might not be the best idea to just get fatter and fatter and fatter, because yes, your absolute strength is going up, but your absolute weight is also going up. To me, if you go from 200 pounds to 300 pounds and you gain 100 pounds on your squat, nothing happened. You didn't get stronger pound for pound, you got stronger in terms of absolute strength. Then the question is, once you're going to pin that strength against people who also compete for strength, are you going to be able to match their lifts at their body weight? And the answer is no. If you look at someone like Free Kid, that I think we all know, who's a monster on the bench, he, I think, was benching 500 pounds at 260 to 70. Maybe he'll correct me in the comments. I personally, to be able to bench 500 pounds, would need to be 400 pounds, right? I would need to be much higher. Is it a good idea for me just to get that number to bulk that up? The answer is no. And the worst thing being also that I know for a fact that even if I can touch these 5 plates, once I lose the weight, I won't be able to, because what moved the weight was fat. Free Kid cut down to, I think, 220. He still benches 4 plates with ease. This means that the mass that he was using to move that weight was muscle. It wasn't fat. It was proven by his cut. This is what needs to be done, right? The strength progression that you get on the bulk, once you cut down, needs to be mainly maintained. And this is when you know I gain muscle. And this correlates with what Geoff was saying. When you cut down, you should not lose that much strength. If on every single cut, your numbers go back down to what they were before the bulk, you gain no muscle. You gain absolutely none, because the tissue that moves the weight regressed to the point that now you move the same weight. So you didn't really bulk, you just got fatter, then you got skinnier again, but there was no progress, and therefore your bulk was a complete failure.
Yeah, I would have a couple of addendums to that. So one thing is the relative strength point, which I think that is something to definitely take into account, especially when that transaction is really bad. So like, I'm sure all of us have gotten into scenarios at some point when we gain some like ungodly amount of weight relative to how minuscule, at least compared to that, was the strength increase on something. And that's a little bit of an awkward moment when you realize that. But I also think it's important to just know that like that's gaining a very favorable ratio of body weight to strength is just not always feasible, which is actually why, like, if you look at power lifters, basically the heavier you go in weight class, the worse that relative strength ratio becomes, or strength to body weight ratio becomes. So basically, like, and the people that have the best strength to body weight ratios are always small guys, like usually short guys as well, not weighing much. And so that's just something for people to keep in mind, because I have seen some articles. I think Martin Burkhan has a famous one where he says that, like, on the deadlift, like, you should gain like 5 units of weight or strength relative to or for 1 unit of body weight gain. So like that's that's okay. So to gain 1 kilo body weight, you should be 5 kilos stronger on the deadlift. It probably is not bad for a while, but like at a certain point, it's just not very feasible. And then the other thing is the body fat percentage consideration. And I'm just curious what you guys think of this theory of mine. Actually, it's not I totally copied someone for this, but I think it's not a bad theory that it's not just about the calorie surplus that is making a bulk anabolic, but to some extent, the body fat gain itself. So basically, body fat, in a way, is a regulator of anabolism, maybe because of some quirky, like evolutionary explanation. Like I made the analogy of gaining muscle is the closest a man can get to being pregnant, in that like you're building living tissue, or what was it, scientific organism, living tissue, or whatever skeleton, the Terminator quote. But so basically you're building some metabolically active tissue on your body, which is costly for the body. So it's not super keen on doing that unless it really feels like, okay, this is a good environment to do it. So, and you know, it kind of makes sense if you think of the shredded person who has a very difficult time building muscle. And so maybe in that sense, it could actually have benefited you, NH, for example, to actually go up to 240. I mean, unfortunately, it's one of those things we can never know, because we cannot go back with a time machine and replicate you and run that experiment. But it could be that, like, okay, yeah, the ratio was bad. Like, it was not a pretty picture, like literally not a pretty picture, but also it was just not a pleasant experience. And also the actual invested effort and what you got out of it was not very favorable. But on the way down, like you still realized some gains that you otherwise wouldn't have, and the extra body fat helped you. I don't know. What do you think of that theory?
So I like the theory, and if we were to look at it from an evolutionary standpoint, it makes sense, right? The body works in balance, and the body is not super keen on building muscle. It's not really his main thing. What the body wants is to keep you alive. So it feeds the organs first. So logically speaking, if we look at this, we would think that to force the body to feed the muscles, we need to give it a stash. We need to tell the body, hey, you can feed the muscles, we're fine. Like, the organs will not starve. We have reserves. And that reserve is fat. So that would explain why people who are 15% body fat or higher have a very easy time gaining muscle. It's not just because they're in a caloric surplus. It's also because they have that fat. That I also agree with. It's the reason why I never go below 15% body fat, because I think that this is my anabolic range. This is where I feel the best, and also where I look the best. I would argue that many naturals look the best with some fat on themselves. 8% body fat, I mean, you're like, what, 150, 160 on stage? I mean, you might look good in pictures, but in real life, it's not that hot. And then that's acceptable. Then we can question the amount of fat that is needed for that to happen. How much fat on the body is needed for the body to prioritize muscle gain? My argument is that above 20%, you're not doing anything, right? Just because you stack more layers of fat on doesn't mean that the anabolic effect increases. Actually, it can even decrease. Right, we have seen that fat people tend to have lower amounts of testosterone, and it could very well be that at some point the body just stops giving you the resources needed to build muscle if you get too fat. We could also find an explanation for that, but if we look back at caveman days, for example, I highly doubt that these people were walking around at 40% body fat. We can say that the ones that had some body fat were much suited for survival, because when there was no food, they could survive longer. And also we, quote unquote, we Caucasians, Europeans, Westerners, whatever you want to call us, we evolved in very cold environments. So it also would make sense for people like us to be more skewed towards higher body fat percentages, because it's what has always allowed the species to survive. And the individuals that survived and pushed our genes further into time were the ones who had this ability to gather fat on their frame. So that's also, in my opinion, logical. But I say that because I really don't want people to follow me in my footsteps, thinking I'm going to get really, really big like NH. No, you can do your bulk, gain some body fat, absolutely, but do it step by step. And then to echo what Geoff has said, I also agree that if you do things properly, you should not be losing muscle mass, or at least not sizable amounts when you cut. Because the caloric deficit is not the reason why you would be losing muscle. the reason you would be losing muscle is because the caloric deficit would put you in a stage where you cannot replicate training stimulus anymore. Your lifts would go down. In the example I just described, you would lose strength. You would go back down to your previous strength levels and previous volume and frequency levels. And now you literally jumped back in time. This is why I don't like cutting and bulking cycles done improperly. It's because it's a loop. It's a limbo. You just go back in time constantly. You are just a bigger and smaller version of yourself, but the actual muscle gain is non-existent. This is what I'm trying to avoid as much as possible.
Fair enough. Geoff, anything to add?
Yeah, so you actually picked up on the exact same thing that I wanted to say, where it's not just the caloric surplus, it's your body fat percentage as well. Like if someone is 5% body fat, they just got done with a show, you know, they can't just hop in a very small caloric surplus and gain their way off into the sunset. It would be nice, but it does have to do with your body fat percentage as well. But I would also agree that it can go too high. I know the P ratio stuff, I think maybe that was on football players as well. Maybe anabolics were involved. I'm not sure. But yeah, you don't see many natural lifters or even enhanced lifters. In fact, enhanced lifters seem to stay even leaner, probably because of insulin sensitivity issues. And so you just don't see that many guys go above, 20-ish% body fat. I guess strongmen, yeah. But again, they're all enhanced. Yeah, it's hard to say. I do think that it's possible to stay too lean. And I personally will gain muscle going from 20% body fat down to 15% body fat, even in a pretty significant deficit, because I'm focused on performance. And even if I'm in a pretty significant deficit, as long as my sleep is fine, as long as I'm getting in enough work in the gym, I will still see progression. Whereas if I'm like 11% body fat, even if I'm eating at maintenance, I really had struggled to progress. So it's definitely not just a surplus or a deficit, it's your body fat percentage as well. Plus, you do have to take into account the fact that when you're at the peak of a bulk, you kind of have a lot of momentum going. Whereas when you're at the bottom of a cut, you have momentum going, but it's kind of in the wrong direction. It's kind of in like that fatigue direction. And you might say, oh, like just eat at maintenance at the bottom of a cut, then you'll be fine, then you'll maintain. But it doesn't work that well. It just doesn't work as well as most people would hope. And that's the problem. That's where most people try to maintain. Not at the top of a bulk, which is where it would work, which is where it's perfect, which is where the term was originally coined from, but at the bottom of a cut. So they'll get down to the bottom, like 11% body fat, maybe 9, maybe 10, maybe, I don't know, maybe 12. And they will try to maintain from there. And it doesn't work that well. So, I guess pick your battles and then try to find how much fat you need on your frame. I mean, there are going to be people out there, it's a range. There are going to be people out there who need to be 20% body fat to feel normal. I've worked with those people where they hit a wall at like 18 or 19% body fat on the way down in a cut. And no matter what we do with the diet, with the sleep, with the training, when they go below 18% body fat, they start feeling like garbage. And eventually I just have to tell them, hey, well, this is your range. Like your 18% body fat is, my 13% body fat. And my 13% body fat is probably someone's 9% body fat. There's going to be someone out there, some freak of nature, who actually can maintain at 9% body fat. It's not going to be common at all, but there's going to be someone out there who just does really well when they're really lean. And they might actually be worse at 19% body fat compared to 9% body fat. So I think most people have a certain window that they can float in, maybe 5% body fat on either side, maybe like 10 to 15 for some people, 15 to 20% for some other people. And then for some other people, maybe it's 18 to 23. And you kind of have to experiment and find what your window is. And it might take a few years.
Geoff, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're like a naturally leaner guy, right? So if you just kind of let yourself do whatever with some like reasonably good eating habits, you would settle like where? What do you think?
I would say if I just didn't focus on anything at all, I don't count calories anyway. But if I just ate to like eating whatever I want, probably 15-ish, maybe
Oh, okay.
16.
Yeah, okay. That's
Yeah, so
reasonable. Yeah.
I wouldn't say super lean.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not one of those guys who just stops eating and then eventually ends up at 12% body fat and is like, hey, what happened? You know,
Yeah.
I kind of have to work to get down to 12%. And then my upper range is like 20-ish or so.
Mm-hmm. Okay, then I think we are
Pretty similar.
similar-ish in that regard. NH, are you a naturally lean guy or?
So I think this is a weird question, not a bad question, a weird question, because it points back to what people call somatotypes, right?
Yeah.
I personally don't believe in these at all because I've been the three. I was the skinny guy, even the names are so stupid I can never remember them. And andromorph, I think it's andromorph they call it.
The skinny guy is ectomorph.
I was ectomorph, then I was endomorph because I got fat, and now I'm mesomorph because I'm jacked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's no such thing as somatotypes. There are certain people who are going to be prone to being skinnier because they're lankier, their metabolism is faster. Some people are tankier, they're more stocky, and they have a slow metabolism. They're going to be more prone towards being more fat. Some people are in the middle, and I think the three of us are in the middle, and we are mesomorphs, whatever that means. It's not justification to not being able to put on muscle to have a good-looking body, but it does mean that it's a case-by-case thing, and it's something that you need to study. You need to study your own body. And once you put in that work, now you can put yourself in the best body fat range to gain muscle, and it's going to mean that you're going to have very productive bulks and also very productive cuts. I think this is the thing with Geoff, is that even though I would never follow his methods, I see why it works for him. Because when you listen to him speak about bulks, he speaks about one thing: muscle building. That's what he cares about when he bulks. That's what he cares about when he cuts. And so that's the training that guides it. And the momentum thing, I think, is especially smart. People need to pay attention to that. You want to gain most of your muscle mass when you bulk. That makes sense. And as you go down on your cut, this doesn't mean that the cut needs to only be a fat loss cycle. You can still gain some muscle on the way down. So essentially, any amount of fluctuation in weight should always be for gaining muscle. But the fluctuations up will always be more prone to getting muscle, which means that you want to spend the majority of your time in a stage where you have the perfect body fat ratio that allows muscle gains, and you're going up, meaning that you are in a caloric surplus. That should be most of your time. If you spend 8 months of the year cutting and 4 months bulking, I think the ratios are distorted and you're doing something wrong because you are not spending enough time in a stage of anabolism. And you see that sort of with natural bodybuilders. They themselves said that when they prep, this is not the time where they're the most productive. So if they spend 5 years doing a show every year, most of the time is spent in prep. At the end of these 5 years, they will have gained almost no muscles. This is why longer off seasons tend to be preferred. So if you're a natural bodybuilder like I am, but you don't compete, your off season is year round. And this means that you should be gaining muscle year-round with all of the things that we just described. But this means looking at who you are and studying yourself. The number one question I get, the number 3, the first one is, why are you French? The second is, how tall are you? And the third is,
What's your name?
Or do I cut? Yeah, the name actually people don't care about, which is great.
Oh.
They've accepted the idea that I'm NH.
Mm-hmm.
And the third question is, bulk or cut? And I'm sure that Geoff can relate. We get pictures from guys. Do I bulk or do I cut? And the answer is, what do I know? I don't know you. I don't know what your goals are. I don't know what your range is. You have to figure it out. But this is why this discussion is so great, because there's nuance. And I know some people are not going to like it because at the end of the talk, they're going to say, well, I still don't have my answer, bulk or cut. Well, that's for you to answer, right? We can't answer that for you.
Yeah. No, it's, those questions, at a certain point I was thinking of like setting up an autoresponder on Instagram. Like if they use the word cut bulk, then I will say this. But what did I want to say? Yeah, like regarding the whole ideal setup, like body fat percentage and how far you should bulk. So you mentioned 2 pounds before, which, as soon as I heard that, I think you mentioned that in your recent bulking meme video as well. Like, as soon as I heard that, I was like, okay, then like, we're not going to have like a major disagreement here, because usually The only time I really don't see eye to eye with someone on this is when they are taking the main gaining approach, like very literally, where like, okay, like basically just stay at the same weight and just like naturally you will gain pure muscle and nothing else, which to me, well, first of all, NH, because you did talk about main gaining and you did say that you kind of like it. Is that something that you ever recommend?
Well, first off, what you describe is possible. It is possible to gain muscle without being on a caloric surplus, but it's slow. It's slow. That's what people need to understand. Yes, a bulk will always be better to gain muscle. Like it's 10 times faster, which means that if your goal is to get bigger as a skinny young man, you have no business main gaining. The issue of main gaining is not the concept itself, it's who it was pushed for, who received the concept, who follows all of the influencers that talk about it. It's usually young men who have no mass on themselves, right? Some of them might be obese, but even the obese ones, they would do better doing a cut. Men gaining, usually the people who have business men gaining are people who are more advanced. So for novices, unless you're skinny fat, I think that skinny fat people might be the ones that can benefit from men gaining, because they're also the ones that have a tendency to, when they gain weight, just get fatter, and when they lose weight, just get skinnier, and they're stuck in that limbo where they think, well, nothing works, right? I'm cursed with this skinny fat body. I think that this is when you say, okay, forget about diet, eat to your heart's sake, follow your appetite, focus on training. The training is what is going to change the body. Once the body is changed, now we can push it in a direction that is going to be either smaller or bigger, but now it's going to make more sense. It's why I was personally forced into recomping. It's because I did things to my body that I would say almost destroyed it, because I was at a point where cutting and bulking didn't work anymore. When I cut, I lost almost all muscle, and I couldn't lose fat in certain areas. I had love handles the size of lumps on the size of my body, and they would not budge from cutting. They would not budge. And then when I tried to regain weight, they would just get bigger. So I was in a stage where I didn't understand what was going on, but my issue is that my training was not doing anything anymore. I had sabotaged my ability to gain muscle. Now, is it psychological? Maybe, but this is what I was dealing with. And this is why I understood that I needed to stabilize, right? I had this versatility and this volatility. That's a great term that Geoff used, of going up and down, up and down. And for me, I went up so long, for way too long, that after that, my ability to use that volatility to gain muscle disappeared. So I had to stabilize for a while. But now I'm at a point where I can go up again, and now it's productive. Now it makes sense. So this is when I would say also that if you're in a panic stage of bulking, cutting, and you see no results anymore, you might have, in a sense, run yourself out of being able to use that system. So maybe taking like a few months, maybe 4 months, just taking a step back, just focusing on training and accepting you're going to get minimal results is a good idea, because then afterwards, when you start bulking and cutting again, now you're going to see results.
So would you hypothesize that the reason that bulking and cutting didn't work for you is because, for some reason that we don't quite understand, like some sort of like maybe hormonal pathway, or who knows what, got like desensitized in your body, or what would you
think? To go back on the idea of ranges, I think that I was out of my range. And it's okay to be out of your range. Like, let's say you pig out a bit for the holidays and you get a little bit too fat. It's fine. The body is not going to self-destruct because you have too much fat on you. But I think that if you spend significant amounts of time in that out of range, for me, it was maybe above 20%, your body starts to adapt to that and it starts to break down. And then when you try to go back down, the body resists, right? Some people call it like starvation mode. We pretty much know that it doesn't exist, but I think that it is absolutely correct to say that if you get too fat or too skinny, and you then try to re-enter a normal range, there's going to be resistance from the body because the body has adapted to it. For me, in terms of aesthetics, it was symbolized by my love handles, but they looked pathological. Like they looked like the symptom of a disease. And I managed to get rid of them by recomping. It was never cutting that allowed me to do that. And I think it's because I stabilized. I went back to normal range. And when you look at all of the things that people who get way too fat experience, like pre-diabetes, all of these symptoms, all of these things, when they lose the weight, might still remain dormant in them. They didn't used to be there. They triggered it by going too high. So this is why I also recommend people to not go out of that range. Yeah, you can go at the top of the range, but don't spend too much time at the top of the range, and also don't exceed that range.
Yeah, so just out of curiosity, so like I know in the like early stages of your channel, I think you were like a bit heavier, like 215 maybe. Is that possible?
Yeah,
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then like 210, like relatively shortly after. So I guess that would be sort of like the beginning of your recom journey.
Yep.
So basically you lost 5 pounds, and like there, at least on the videos, it seemed like that all went from your stomach. Like you had like a decent midsection before, and after that it was like a holy shit. Like that's, if I could have a midsection like that. So then like you were already at that point where cutting, at least to that extent, like losing those 5 pounds was working again, or that was before you fixed?
So it's a different video, and it's a point that is maybe going to piss off some people, but it's the truth, so I have to say it. These 5 pounds I didn't try to lose. I lost them because I made a diet change. I went from eating lots of red meat and consuming tons of dairy and drinking tons of milk to cutting these out of my diet entirely. And in a matter of a month, I lost 5 pounds, and that 5 pounds was all in my love handles, all in my stomach. I didn't reduce my calories at all. I mean, I took away these very high caloric sources. So it's perfectly possible to say that I entered a deficit, but I cannot say it's because I was in a caloric deficit that I lose the weight the way I lost it, because I'd never seen that in my life. It's like everything around my midsection just melted. It just went away, and my health improved immediately. So that's the discussion on diet and bulking also that's so important, is that you can have the same individual doing the same bulk with the same amount of calories, and individual A is going to do it with, I don't know, like mostly vegetables and lean meat and turkey. The other one is going to do it with red meat and milk. And if I am this individual, bulk A is successful and bulk B turns me fat. Even though it's the same caloric increase and I'm at the same weight at the end of the bulk, no, not all calories are born equal. That's nonsense. That's also an individual thing. You need to look at the types of food that are going to be the more conducive to you being anabolic and gaining quality mass. And just because a calorie is a calorie, yes, doesn't mean that you're going to get the same benefits from different food sources. That's, in my opinion, really untrue.
Yeah. Okay. I almost told a very random story, which would have been a really bad idea because we've been going on for quite a while. So yeah, like there was after, what was I saying before? Oh yes, on the main gaining thing. So yes, I agree with you. Like you can build muscle without a surplus, but like, what do you think would be too low of a weight gain rate? Do you think that gaining a pound a month is still okay? I personally think that that's too slow, in the sense that it's almost unquantifiable. Like how do you actually ensure that you're gaining that much? Do you think it is viable? If not, what do you think is viable?
Yeah, so I think that the more advanced you are, the more mass you already have on your body, the lower you can allow the gain to be, because the higher of a chance this is going to be quality mass. Right? If some guy who's 130 told me I'm going to gain a pound a month, maybe not. Maybe a little bit more, maybe 2 or 3 pounds, maybe 4 pounds, maybe 5 pounds. That makes more sense. Then you can slow it down, right? A bulk is not linear. You're not going to gain 5 pounds a month for the rest of your life. It's like, it would be like saying I'm going to add 5 pounds to the bar on bench press every time I bench. No, because if that was possible, you would bench 1,000 pounds. So you're also going to have to scale down the amount of weight you gain, the more weight you gain. That also makes sense. The bigger, and you made that point, even with strength, it's true. The bigger the body gets, the less addition you can make. It's like making a statue. When you start making a statue, you start with big chunks, right? There's nothing. You start with big chunks and you pile the chunks together. But then when you start having a torso, you're not going to add a chunk to the torso, because now you have a tumor. You're going to add a tiny bit on the lat, a tiny bit on the bicep. So the bigger the statue you get, the less substance you have to add to the statue for it to be sculpted. That's the point. But then you also have to ask yourself, how little is too little, right? A pound a month could be something that is just due to fluctuation in like water retention. And in that case, yes, it's really hard to track, because you could realize after a while that you're just spinning your wheels. This is when maybe adding a little bit more is better. Maybe 2 pounds a month is more realistic, because the bigger the fluctuation in weight is, the easier it is to track. So that's, I think, a perfectly fair point.
Awesome. Geoff, anything to add?
Yeah, actually, I think that food quality is a little bit underrated. People will go by the macros and by the calories and by the protein and maybe even by meal timing. But I do think that the actual foods that you're putting in your body, it is relevant. For example, in my 2021 bulk, it was pretty dirty, a fair amount of pizza, burgers, that kind of thing. And I still made progress. Like you can still gain strength by shoveling shit in your mouth. Like it's still possible. But my face was always like my whole head was just swollen. And I
Oh,
do
yeah.
think that inflammation levels are relevant here, maybe insulin sensitivity as well, maybe leptin sensitivity. And I think keeping to mostly foods that you respond best to, which again is going to take some experimentation over the course of many years to find. For example, I do really well on milk. If I add milk to my diet, I get, I feel very full. My muscles feel, full of, I think most people know what I'm talking about. They feel like full of glycogen, etc. Whereas other people, they have those foods and maybe they feel a little bit sloppy or they feel like they spill over. And I do think maybe the inflammatory response, perhaps the gut microbiome, could be relevant here. And I do think that you can't just say, oh, here are my calories, fill them in. I do think that food quality is pretty important. And I don't think it's really talked about enough.
Yeah. To an extent, actually, I'm not sure how purely a negative thing that is that you get that inflammatory response. It could, I mean, probably it's not great for your health, but probably part of it is just like a lot of water retention. I could see that as like somewhat anabolic, like something that could actually help you lift. But I get the same thing as you do. I mean, I actually posted a picture about it on my old Instagram. Like my face actually looked like a zombie. Like it actually looked scary. Like I have the sleeping mask, and because I retained so much water, it was like leaving these marks. Like it was hilarious. But yeah, I think that I'm really not sure sometimes what is actually anabolic about or if a bigger surplus is anabolic, like why is it anabolic? Is it because it facilitates the weight gain, which helps by itself, or the body fat that helps by itself? Is it that you have more energy to lift, or is it that maybe there is actually nothing physiologically better about like a 500 calorie surplus versus a 50 calorie surplus? But it's just simply that, like, let's say you eat 100 calories more than what your true maintenance is. Like you will still have these ups and downs, right? Like you will have times during the day when you're in a surplus, and then others when you're in a deficit. When you're in a bigger surplus, simply like you will have less of the valleys, right? Like you will spend more of your time in a net surplus. So it could just be that. So maybe that's why partly it's actually worth it to gain a little bit more. Is just, I think, like I have experienced it too many times, mainly with clients, not so much with myself, but your daily body weight fluctuations, like that can easily overwhelm like how like that 100 grams that you would try to gain in a week if you were really trying to aim for a pound a month. And then some people say like, well, then why don't you just go for a small surplus? Like then just, your maintenance, you go for 100 calorie surplus. Is like, okay, but how do you know that it's a surplus? Like you need to verify it with something. So yeah, I think that's why like 2 pounds ish, I think that's like a good sweet spot. It's still like not ridiculously high, but it's also not impractically low. So like that tends to be my kind of sweet spot. Anything to add to this, guys? Or I think slowly we can start thinking about wrapping up. So if you think there is like a topic that we definitely should have touched on, feel free to mention it.
Well, one thing I would add to this is that, as I said, your bulk doesn't have to be linear, right? So if 2 pounds is a sweet spot, you could also do 2 pounds, 1 pound. But 2 pounds where for a fact you're gaining, then 1 pound that is going to serve as a downgrade of calories that you're still technically in a surplus, but you're not sure. But you also know that it's going to limit the amount of fat that you're going to gain. That is also something doable. I think that the gradual approach to cuts and bulks is detrimental to some people because they see it as a number that has to decrease or increase, and they refuse to accept that you can interject another number in between. You don't have to do 2, 2, 2, 2, 2 or 2, 3, 4, 5. You can do 2, 1, 2, 3, 1. Yes, it creates more chaos and fluctuation, but that's the bulks and the cuts. You have to look at that fluctuation, but because that's the reason why you're doing that. And then for the food quality, as Geoff said, it's underrated, right? People hyper-focus on calories because that's what a bulk is. But just like we've tried to segue the discussion more towards training quality, we should also look at food quality because it can make or break your bulk. And at the end of the day, getting muscle is great, yeah, but the health implications also mean a ton. That's also why it's not the best idea to gain too much weight. What if you get sleep apnea? You're big, sure, but you're also choking in your sleep. So was it worth it?
Yeah. As in, no, it's not worth it. But yeah, no, totally. And actually, that's that is potentially a big issue for some people with bulking up super high. Like if you at a certain point, even I lose my appetite. But I mean, I can always like boredom eat myself to higher body weights, even on like really wholesome foods if I needed to. So I'm pretty sure I could bulk up to like 110 kilos on like berries and whatever, like non-starchy veggies even. But it would suck. So most probably what would actually happen is that I would just lose my discipline in that regard, and I would start to eat like shit. And I would enjoy it as well. That like, well, finally, I don't have this compulsion to just eat like an entire whatever pantry full of junk food. I can moderate it a little bit, and I would eat it regularly. So, and that's what tends to happen with most people. Their eating habits kind of degrade gradually as they are gaining body weight. So probably, I mean, that's kind of like a practical reason as well why you shouldn't go up super, super high in body fat. But yeah, a lot of this for me during bulking comes down to what's practical versus what would be like ideal on paper. Like if practicality was not a thing, then I would actually have an easier time making arguments both for much more aggressive bulks, but also for like very, very conservative ones. Like in that case, like, yeah, bulk for like 4 years straight on like some very tiny surplus. I could see that working. In practice, I think it would be very difficult to pull off. And the same thing with being more aggressive for me. Any addendums, folks? Yeah, go on.
To quote Mike Tyson, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. It's the same with cutting and bulking. Everyone has a bulking plan until they realize what the bulking plan is actually doing. So videos like this are great because I think we get pointers to people. But if people just take it home thinking, well, that's it, it's solved. No, you have to apply it, right? This is theory. It sounds nice in theory, but I could also make you a training plan that is going to make you look like the Hulk. In theory, it's going to work, but in reality, you're going to look like the guy from SpongeBob that lifts the teddy bears out of the Olympic bar. I don't know if you know what I mean. I'm sure people in the comments are going to be able to pinpoint that. But yeah, I think there's an episode in SpongeBob where they're trying to get really buff, and so they bench press like teddy bears instead of Olympic plates because that's all they have available.
Nice. I think there are a ton of like the Mike Tyson quote is good for this. And in fitness in general, like we've had so many things that sounded amazing on paper. And then like we had great analogies for that, like the metabolism, like your metabolism will be faster if you eat more frequently. Like that was a classic. It's like, how would you fuel a fire with like many small pieces of wood or one giant? Where it's like, of course, with many small pieces. And then it turns out that like, no, it actually is literally no difference. So yeah, I think sometimes you also need to just kind of try things. And okay, I was gonna say some gigantically big cliche, so I'm gonna shut up. But yeah, if you folks have no more addendums to this, then I want to thank you so much for taking the time. It's awesome that we got to get this underway so efficiently. So NH and Geoff, thank you both.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And just please let us know where we can find you all. Geoff, you can start.
So it's Geoffrey Verity Schofield on YouTube, on Instagram, and I've also started shit posting on Twitter. It's GVS Fit, so that should be fun.
Oh yeah. I should follow you. NH.
Well, I focus all of my efforts on YouTube, so you can find me. Usually, I like to post 2 or 3 times a week. If you are fed up of TikTok videos, you are going to find yourself right at home because a lot of my videos are hours long. So sit in and enjoy yourself. Instagram, I just post pictures of myself shirtless. So if you're into that type of stuff, fine. And then Twitter, I post once a year when YouTube deletes my channel. So it's very rare.
Nice. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
stopping this.